Okay, can we call this meeting to order, please? Can I get a roll call?
Ms. Hockenberry?
Here.
Mr. Lawrence?
Here.
Mr. Lofterson?
Here.
Ms. Rogers?
Here.
Ms. Teets?
Here.
Mr.
Mixing with this guy.
Mr. Meese is absent temporarily. I'm expecting him tonight. Mr. Bodiska is absent for the evening.
And Mr. Wadiska is in Ecuador.
Oh, that's right, climbing volcano.
He's climbing a volcano, so he's probably having a lot more fun than us. Could I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
I move that we adopt the agenda.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the agenda is adopted. Do we have any planning commissioner reports? Ms. Hockenberry?
Thank you. Went to the affordable housing policy meeting the other night, and they're still doing the reports, and had a speaker come in to speak about affordable housing, which is, of course, not going anywhere in any of the areas except for Arlington. Arlington's still doing a great job. But I really want to get some input. You can send me emails or call me up or something or other about your ideas on the policy. You know, we know that this present policy didn't quite work as it should have or could have. So we know that it's worked in some cases and not in others, but what kind of changes in a policy will actually work and which will actually bring on board the council and something that the Planning Commission could also work with. So it's really kind of important. Since, we may be in a situation where, might have some development going on, we need to have at least an outline, if not a definite policy. They're not thinking of having the policy really wrapped up until May, which, probably go on into June. So I think I suggest that they really need to have some outline in mind so when people do negotiate on things that we can do. But I'd like to know kind of like what groups do you think we should focus on? Should it be the young professionals, that type of thing, to have a focus as for affordable housing? And probably all, we don't know, but probably it'll be rental rather than sale coming up, in any future development. But what kind of, size of units? If you're focusing on the young professionals, they can be smaller units. But also the big key thing is when we get to the nitty-gritty, do we want to stick firmly to units, or what do we have as a plan for any money we get in a proffer? And since we've gotten, sometimes offers of money, but nobody quite knows what to do with it yet. We don't have a real plan in mind what to do with any money on affordable housing, whether to take it for to save some of the housing that's, might be available, or just what should we do with it, since it'll be a finite situation, most likely. So give me your ideas. It's a pretty diverse group, and I'm particularly glad that we've got a developer, Ed Novak, on it too. So perspective of what developers, how that might work. Yeah, Ruth.
I have a question. Are they intending on using our current affordable housing policy as a base and then building on that, or are they starting from scratch?
I don't know.
Okay.
Frankly, that's there. We know what's worked with it, what hasn't worked. That was, put in place about almost 10 years ago now. So I think things have got to be looked at with a new eye to what things are like in the here and now. And of course, we've gotten reports from a lot of different people that, more people are tending to rent now than want to buy. And, and again, what groups do you want to focus on to build up a density of that type,
Lindy, I was thinking in terms of the percentages.
Yeah, this is, whether we're going to go on percentages or what, right? Because the percentages have never worked we've never quite gotten there.
Okay, thank you.
And whether we should lower our percent, we base that, I think, on Arlington's percentage, if I'm correct, but I don't remember exactly.
It was Fairfax originally.
Fairfax's, and of course, Fairfax has had to pull back quite a bit because of the political climate there. But whether it should be on percentages or just what are we looking for when we go out there and talk with developers? Because it's going to be a key item, because I don't think we're ever going to get any, standalone affordable housing, so it'll probably all have to be in new developments. Or do we want to go and see if there's any means, as we have studied in the past, of getting more involved with trying to save the units that we have that are affordable?
Sounds like a lot of really big questions that need to be
Yeah.
answered.
And they are putting together some ideas, as we're working along. And but we most of all, we have to have something that will work with council. If it doesn't work with council, we won't get anything.
I assume you have a council representative too, so.
Yeah, Lawrence Webb is on it.
Okay. Well, I have some thoughts for you. I'll make sure I forward them to you in an
Please,
email.
thank you.
And other commissioners, if you have any thoughts for Lindy. Because it sounds like they're willing to revamp the entire strategy and the way we do it. So there's a chance to really come up with something
And the
that
two
maybe works
chairs
better.
are very, very adamant about doing something, as Don Brobst and Craig Cheney.
Okay, great. It sounds, I hope you guys move forward and
So, they're go-getters. They'll get something done on it. But it's quite a good working group, because it's got people from,
I know
Here,
like
I'm losing
VPIS,
it.
I was gonna say, I know like VPIS has a representative on it, so there's some community representatives.
right, but
and-
we've also got
and-
accessibility
Right,
representatives.
and so you have lots of different.
And,
um,
a lot of people who are not part of Falls Church, too.
Right. And Lindy and I have both been attending a facilities task force that's looking at how we deal with our facilities issues. And that is also a really nice mix. And we have a lot of city staff on there from different perspectives. We have had some representatives from the school side, which has been really great. And that's another...
ADA.
An ADA, and so that's been really helpful. Ms. Mester's running that, and we're hoping we'll be able to work through and come up with a really good plan for facilities going forward. So that's been really helpful. Does anyone else have a report, planning commissioners? Nope. Okay, seeing no one else, let's move on to receipt of petitions. Do we have any letters or emails or anything on items not on the agenda?
Madam Chair, I have none.
Thank you. And so we'll move on to the planning director's report. Mr. Snyder?
Members of the Commission, pleased to let you know that we've had a good meeting today, kicking off the 24-hour fitness process. They should be getting their building permits very shortly, but we met with their representatives and city staff, so that is moving forward. Also, the final site plan for Dominion Jewelers, the bond issues and other things are being worked out, and that's being signed off today, and should be finished this week. Gary Fuller has done a really good job of keeping that moving and helping the applicant move forward. There have been a couple of slight redesigns, which include an actual door on Broad Street. So I know the commission will be pleased to see that. That's, as it evolved, that became something that was doable, and we've encouraged that, so the new plan will have an operable door there, as well as another exit door on the parking lot side. You have in front of you the monthly report, and there are a number of items there, including some inspections of properties. This month we did have a situation where we had to, with fire marshal, clean out the basement of a business because it presented a real danger, and that's still being worked on. But again, these are detailed to some extent in the report itself. I mentioned last time we'd completed sorting and getting rid of a lot of materials. We're awaiting final destruction of a large amount of old plants down at the property yard, which have been culled through and are now ready for and approved for recycling, if you will, through meeting the state standards. I am looking in early February to give an update to the EDA and also the Planning Commission of where we are in a small area plan. So we're looking ahead at February as a time to brief you on and get some feedback, have a work session on that. So we'll be trying to schedule that on a meeting where there's time for that to be done effectively. But we are making some progress there, and be interested in getting your feedback and comments. This Saturday, I'll be attending a meeting, neighborhood meeting that Columbia Baptist Church is holding with some of the neighbors near that facility, where they I think are going to be talking with folks about their interest in doing some expansion, modernization of their facility. So I'll report back to you on what comes out of that. We're working on our budget and submitting our preliminary budget to the manager this week, and looking ahead at needing in terms of what kinds of resources we'll need to continue doing good work on the small area plan and updating the comprehensive plan. And I will be making a case for some additional resources to do that kind of work if we're going to make sustained progress on it. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions for Mr. Snyder? Lindy, Ms. Hockenberry?
A couple things looking at this report that we just had at the desk here. But since you mentioned budget, you've got the permits, and I found it very interesting. We're not getting the amount of money that permits cover, 95 permits, almost $16,000. Are we making sure that they're covering our costs, the fees for permits? Because we have done some upgrading of fees in the past.
We have some of the permit reporting waits until the final permit is issued, and then the funds collected, some of it in pieces for that project, will be put into our system. So those numbers should go up as major projects like 24-Hour Fitness are approved, as well as the hotel. So we'll see how those numbers turn out as we go forward this year. But the permit fees do not cover all of our costs in the department. We would need very high fees to do that, and so we have a balance of fees to help offset costs, but also we need budget support for the staff to do the work for the community here.
Right, because we have been making quite a focus over the last few years of updating fees to make sure that they are both reasonable, but on both sides.
And I think we'll be looking at leaving fees as they are. There was a big adjustment last year to bring them into conformance with where they should be. We are going to be looking, I think, at a fee that will help us purchase the kinds of things we need to do to modernize and streamline computers, scanners, things that we need to keep records more efficiently, move away from the paper and pencil approach to a more streamlined approach, and buying equipment to help do that. And that's being looked at in conjunction with our IT department and Cindy Mester.
And one other thing, I see that the Quinn's Auction House has their sign up. Are they doing business there yet, or have they moved the business?
They purchased that building, and they've been in a process of moving their business over there. I believe they're operating over there now. We've had a lot of interaction with them to help them make that transition, and they made a number of improvements to the building. I think they believe it's an interim kind of use that'll serve them well, and someday in the distant future that property might be redeveloped. But they were able to purchase it and move their business there, and we're hopeful that the activity that business generates will spill over into and be a complement to other businesses in the area, restaurants and
the other space
arts.
is up for lease by the owners of that building, because I know
believe they are working on that. Yes,
on that building. But that's a good example of actually a homegrown business. The family originates from here and went into one space and built and then went into a bigger space. And that would be a wonderful thing to have other businesses do that along the way.
And they did purchase that building.
Right, right.
Which is a big step for a business.
Right?
Mr.
It's all
Lawrence?
those wonderful things they're doing.
Just back on the small area plans, about a year ago, we had a work session with the council where you laid out plans to try to get, you were getting regional money or state money, I can't remember which, to, try to help you have enough resources to do it. That obviously didn't work out. At the same time last year, compared to this year, do you have any more staff or any more resources now than you did then?
No.
Okay. And the only reason I'm saying that is, he said he's putting together what sort of resources he would need, and he'll obviously make his case to the city manager, but we may need to think about making our case to the city council if they really expect these to get done at the same time that we're doing the 5-year update of the comp plan and everything else, hopefully with developments coming in, because otherwise I just see this dragging out forever.
It will, because you have to do the things that have to be done, which is site plans and working with developers before you can do the planning part.
Right, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I think, we may need to make a case ourselves.
I agree.
To help.
One of the things I will say, we've had a number of grants that the city's been successful in getting on transportation items, and we have some great people working to try to make those happen. Bill Hicks and Wendy Block Sanford. But Wendy, being one of our primary planners, her time is really pretty much totally consumed with that. So her ability to work on other things like comprehensive planning really isn't there. She needs help actually doing the transportation work. So in a sense, our success in that area and the major things that are coming forward need a lot of attention. If we're going to make progress on the comprehensive plan, I think we need someone to be able to focus on that. We're doing the best we can parceling it out, but as you know, that's not always the best approach. And certainly on the small area plans, they take focus, time, and attention if we're going to be able to do the 8 areas, and we've made some progress, but you really need a real resource to make progress over a sustained period of time.
Right. Well, and also we've got, the school boards here, we've got TJ expansion, which isn't something that can drag out forever. It's got to get started fast, and it's got to get done soon. So.
And we've attended we attended their kickoff meeting just so schools and their contractors make sure that they knew who to contact on our side as we try to process that efficiently. And of course, that some of those things will be coming for this body and the city council as well.
Okay. I did want to note that you had some dates on the back of our agenda for future anticipated items. I want to make sure all of the commissioners saw that. Adoption of the CIP recommendations, or some town halls on there as well, so that you guys are aware of those dates. Oh, and especially the extra session we have on January 30th, our 5th Monday. So that's going to be an extra session for us. Also, and I didn't see this on there, I know that the council adopted on first read-in the property maintenance code that we had worked on. So I'm assuming that's going to be scheduled at some point for our public meeting.
We're actually advertising it. Thank you for mentioning that. We're advertising that for February 6th.
Okay.
And it will be going to the following meeting of council on the following Monday, I believe. We have gotten some feedback from the AAB, and that's been shared with the Board of Zoning Appeals. The historic group also has been supportive and had some comments that we'll include. So that will be coming forward to you on Monday, on February 6th.
Yeah, I did want to point out, and maybe you could, just kind of describe some of the changes. That the actual finished product looked a little bit different than the last copy we saw. It looked like you guys moved a lot of material that we'd had in 15 to the end of 33. And I'm assuming that was done because the staff felt it worked better in 33.
It's really trying to consolidate all the ideas of property maintenance in one area as best we can, so that you can find it in one place. And so the zoning portions have been shifted over generally into that. And we can give you more detail on, if you have, I know you had some specific questions that you wanted to
Well, I
ask
had
about.
a few specific questions, only because I had some citizens contact me who were a little bit concerned, and some of the points that we had, that some people would see this and be really concerned about the use of the word shall, because that's a very strong legal word. But, I definitely feel like it has to be shall, especially when we deal with commercial properties. If we have weak language, then we're not going to get anyone to follow through and actually do it. And then there was you guys may even have caught this, there was a few mistakes, like where we defined what an inoperable vehicle is. We put the term in City of Falls Church inspection sticker. And I think maybe we meant to have City of Falls Church sticker, comma, state inspection sticker.
Yes.
Yeah, and so there's just I'll send that kind of stuff to you. But there was one other concern I got, is that on the rodent and insect harborage section, which was the 33-8, I know, wonderful section, it talks about not having loss of standing water, so that if it rains, that there wouldn't be water standing for 7 days after the rain. And people were concerned that the language there would actually prohibit rain barrels.
No,
I don't
it's-
think...
It's really intended, as you all know, there's been a serious West Nile virus
Right.
problem in Northern Virginia and here in the city as well. And this is designed to make people aware of, take measures to eliminate these situations.
Right, no, I understand.
And rain barrels can be, of course, used, and there are lots of ways to keep mosquitoes out of them, so.
Well, and I think that really the intent of this is not to tell people they can't have rain barrels, but perhaps we might have to add a sentence in there that this does not prohibit rain barrels, but that the rain barrels are expected to have net-in or other anti-mosquito technology. I'm trying to think, what are the donuts called? I guess they're Well, anyway, you have there's those.
Those are all
Yeah, they're
good,
pesticides.
good comments and important, because we don't want to discourage that kind of use. There also were some changes made to allow yard areas to have, not defining alternative ways of keeping your yard as weeds. So there's been adjustments there. And there also was a suggestion by the AAB about peeling paint, to talk about it primarily, that there had to be a substantial situation. It wasn't like any peeling paint was grounds for
and I think
dinging someone.
I think when we have our meeting and you guys get a full copy of it's, like I said, it's mostly some things were shifted since we saw it, but we really should go through and really look at the language, especially where shall is used, and make sure we think that language is clear enough. And in some places maybe we need to put a little bit more squishiness in there for people, because I don't want anyone to be afraid of this. I think it's a really valuable thing to have for the city, and especially with some of our commercial properties, it's very needed. But I think, some homeowners looked at it and we're getting a little bit concerned. And we brought that up as well, and Ruth especially pointed out that that some people were going to have an issue with it. I think the other thing too is, I know a good amount of this, especially like the weeds section, the inoperable vehicles, a lot of this was pulled from other chapters. It existed already. It just wasn't laid out well. It was silly for the Environmental Services Group to be the ones going out putting out notices about weeds when it's really that's not really a great part of their job. But I guess, I just think that as we look through language, let's just make sure that it's as good as it can be, so that people aren't going to be afraid. I think the other one that I got was the gutters, where they need to be kept free of debris. And people were like, most people don't do that but once a year. So I think maybe we can come up with some modification there.
Well, and part of that is, when you go by and you see trees and little
trees
plants
growing
growing out of the gutter,
Right.
you know that they're not operating. And of course, we have a lot of rainwater issues here, and neighbors who depend on proper guttering and handling of water to solve those problems. So staff will be using good judgment on these kinds
Right.
of things, but we've all seen on occasion a place where the gutter was no longer functioning other than
yeah.
to grow other new plants.
Well, my comment to that was that I think it would have to be a lot of debris to be visible from the street.
Right.
But, you just don't know. And there's always a fear that people read through this, and there's a fear that, you know, they might get caught up in something when they had every intention of keep maintaining and then there was also mention of elderly people, and I'm sure in that case, the staff would deal with the situation
And of course,
appropriately.
the big change here is violations that previously were misdemeanors and
Right.
had big fines, and jails, you know, were criminal kinds of things that we thought unnecessarily would be handled in a more rational way through this approach of warning letters. The hope is really that we would not have fines because people will understand more clearly what their responsibilities are and keep their properties in good condition, and warning letters will solve problems. That's I think what most jurisdictions have found, but they're not having the criminal situation come into play unless there's a real endangerment to life and property.
I mean, we can go through this more in depth on February 6th, but I just wanted to mention I was already getting some feedback, and that we should be prepared to really explain the value of this ordinance change on the 6th.
We appreciate that.
And then
If
we
you
can-
have additional comments along the way, we certainly appreciate those. All of those have helped shape this as it's gone forward. Thank you.
Melissa?
Ms.
On
Hockenberry?
the same subject, when it does go forth to the public, I think it would be a wise idea to have some sort of preamble stating that these were pulled from other already standing regulations and policies and such like that.
Well, that
So
wasn't,
that people don't think, oh, we're creating all this new stuff and getting all upset. All this stuff has been on the books.
Well, some of this is really designed to solve as you all have heard and the council's heard, long-standing complaints on properties that never seem to get fixed. And so our hope is this will help us solve some of those problem properties. Most properties don't have problems at all, but there are a few that become a real problem for the neighbors around them, and this kind of a tool will help us solve those. Also, we think on the historic properties side, it can help us with that as well. So,
help encourage maintenance of the
yeah,
historic
help
properties.
encourage maintenance,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I would just say in our, in the staff report that we get for that meeting, can we on one page just reference where things were moved from? So
Yes,
that we
we
can just
can.
say, here is where
a good
things were
idea.
moved from.
And there are some new things here. I mean, this, you know, in terms of the property maintenance part of it, making it clear, you know,
Filling gaps
property
that,
should be
yeah.
maintained, gutters should be maintained, property should be painted, not peeling. So,
Do they need to say where it came from, or simply highlight what's new? I mean, if it's already somewhere, I mean, honestly, I don't care where it is, if it's being consolidated. I'm just really focused on what is actually new out of these.
and we did a little piece for the council on that, and we can share that with you
Okay, that's fine.
for your hearing.
Right. Okay, so we are now on to old business, which we have none, and we're on the new business. It's the presentation of FY 13-17 Capital Improvements Program, CIP, All Funds, General Fund, School Fund, and Utilities Fund by Assistant City Manager, Ms. Mester, and we're going to receive a presentation, and then we'll have a public hearing.
Good evening, Chair Teets and Planning Commission. It's my honor to be back for the annual CIP presentation and some ongoing work sessions working towards your February 13th scheduled adoption. And I'll defer to you all if you want to dim the lights or if you can see the presentation clear enough.
Ms. Mester, just one second. Would the school board representatives, would you like to speak before the presentation? Do you mind, Ms. Mester, if they speak first?
Of course not.
Okay. So we have a speaker slip for Susan Carney of 410 Great Falls, City of Falls Church, and I believe she's going to speak in for the school board. And you're welcome.
I'm Susan Carney, 14 Great Falls Street. I'm here tonight representing the school board. Thank you, Ms. Mester, for ceding to me to do this earlier. I won't take too terribly long, however. I did want to give you just a smidgen of background about the submission that the school board approved for the CIP for the 2013-2017 period, because it signals some decisions that the school board has made and some clarification of issues that we've been talking about for probably too long in the city as regards school facilities. A few things I'd point out. First, what we passed and sent along was an eye-popping $95 million CIP request. So don't faint if you see that. Most of it is for school renovation and construction. A few things I want to make sure that you understand. First, you'll see in there that we are going to continue our request for the Cherry Avenue location, where we plan to put our pre-K programs in the future. So that'll be in the CIP request from us. Second, you'll see that we have money there for renovation and upgrade of our Mount Daniel facility. We're trying to signal to the community here that we don't plan to consider moving our first graders and our kindergartners over to the Thomas Jefferson site. We want to keep them right where they are at Mount Daniel. What that means is that we do intend to keep at the Thomas Jefferson site our current second, third, and fourth graders, and plan with the expansion that we're starting on now to move our fifth graders back from Mary Ellen Henderson, as we've been talking about for the past few years. And then the last thing is we put $40 million in each of 2 of the last years of this. And our intent there was to signal that while we've been talking about George Mason and the need to do something with our high school for quite some time, we continue to kick that can down the road. And the school board intends to try to stop doing that and rather to take it up and try to find innovative, creative ways to provide the facility for our students that we need at the high school level. George Mason presently is expensive to maintain. It's porous and expensive in terms of its energy use. It's almost impossible to secure because of the number of doors in and out of the place. It's sprawling, not up to date, and sits on what is probably the most valuable piece of property in our city. And so it's the intention of the school board, rather than kicking it down the road, to have discussion with you folks, city council, and others to try to determine a workable solution for George Mason in the closer term time frame. That's my story. Just wanted you to have a little bit of background from the school board perspective as you look at our CIP request. We will be taking these changes and amending our facilities plan to put these in the plan so it's more comprehensive for everyone in the city to see later on this year. And Madam Chairman and my colleagues, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Do you want to stay up there in case any of the planning commissioners have a few questions or a comment? Mr. Meeks?
So we get no cost savings in moving somebody to Cherry Street, so we have to spend $2 million, and then we have to also keep Mount Daniel. We get no, so we've bandied about all these issues, and there was always some efficiency that was projected from either Cherry Street or doing something with Mount Daniel or nothing. So this just spends the money. What's the efficiencies of keeping Cherry Street or doing something with that?
Actually, based on our current plan, there are efficiencies in terms of cost. We had in our current facilities plan predicted about a $17 million expenditure at Mount Daniel for upgrade and revision. And in the request, if you combine the Cherry Avenue property in Mount Daniel,
I'm sorry, where's the $17 million?
That was in our previously approved plan that we approved last fiscal year. So by doing this, we'll save money from that $17 million as well, have capacity for growth, which we're seeing at a far higher rate than we had anticipated. So
the $17 million to 2.2 for Cherry Street and 6.2 for Mount Daniel.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And we'll certainly have a work session. Have you set the date yet, Cindy?
Yeah, January 30th, when I get to the presentation, you'll see we'll have several work sessions, and January 30th will be on school facilities to delve into this in more detail.
Right.
Mr. Meeks, at one point they were projecting $17 million because they were going to have to tear down a portion of Mount Daniel and rebuild it to be able to get the preschool back in the building and deal with the expected growth of the 2 grades. So what they've done is they went from $17 million, 2.2 to 6.2. But I do say, I've been looking at what came out from the reports that came out when you guys had your meetings and everything, and I do have some issues that I think you do need to think about. One thing with Cherry Street is it currently is not legally parked. And when this grandfathered in use leaves, we're going to have to deal with the fact that there can't be a site plan for it as it is right now. We'll have to do something about the parking. The second thing is I went back and looked at the facilities task force meeting report that we did, 3 years ago, Susan, I think? And I was looking.
Only 3, it seems like more.
I think it was 3.5 now, maybe. But I was looking through all the options, and I do wonder, because I think this would be a substantial savings if we have considered going. One of the options for Mount Daniel was going for pre-K kindergarten and moving first to TJ, and just leave 5th in the middle school right now, because that would actually save us $8 million and allow us to concentrate on the high school. Maybe sooner, which I really believe that we can't wait much longer for the high school. And the other thing I just want to mention real quick, is the high school sits on that area. Fairfax County has zoned it for low to mid-density housing, not commercial.
Yep.
So it's not valuable property right now in terms of like what you could get from commercial is valuable and only what you could get for townhouses. So that's something we got to consider, is what would Fairfax County allow to be zoned there if we were thinking about moving.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. I'm going to ask my friend in the back to take note of those, and certainly during our work session, we'll have plenty of chance
Right.
to talk about those in detail. I would let you know that we did not reconsider moving the 5th grade back to TJ based on feedback from parents as well as recommendations of our educators in our school system. We think the 5th graders need to be back at TJ with the 4th and 3rd and 2nd graders for best implementation of the PYP program as well as for their own emotional, social, and academic development. With regard to the Mason site, I don't want to go into great depth and hold Cindy up, but I do want to tell you that we have undertaken last several months assessments of our properties at the George Mason site and the Mount Daniel site, and will at some point be able to share with you what the values are as currently zoned.
Yeah, I will say that I have a 6th grader and I have a child with Finnish and I have a 1 at TJ, so I've gone through different variations of what these schools would look like. And what I found is it works no matter what, because we have very good teachers. And my daughter went to MEH for 5th grade and had a fabulous time. She's enjoying 6th grade, and my other daughter is enjoying TJ right now, and my son enjoyed all of it all the way through. And so I'm one of those parents, I'm not so worried about where we shift grades. I think we're a small school system. And I consider it a wave effect. If we have to wave through and move people this way and wave through and move people back, because that's what we have to do. At least we're one linear school system. We're not like Fairfax County often having to move, like you're in one school system, suddenly you're in a different school. And so I think that's one thing nice. We know where we're going to be. We just may move up or down based on what we need. And I think people need to recognize that we have a valuable small school system, but we also have to sometimes wave back and forth because we're small.
Yeah.
But
thanks for that.
okay, thank you so much for all your comments, and we look forward to having our work session. It'll be fun.
Yes. Thanks. Good night.
Okay, good night. How's that leapfrogging going?
And with that, this evening, what I'd like to cover is an overview in the format of the CIP section, which will be tab 1 of your notebook, the process and schedule for the work sessions, which is also included in your tab 1. We'll go in quite a bit of detail this evening, the financial status and the new policies that Council has adopted to set the stage for the CIP projects that you'll be reviewing. Look at the summary and the fiscal projections as we normally do. That's tab 3. This year you'll see I've given you 2 scenarios, one that I recommend, and the second scenario is what I'm referring to as the all-in. So it has George Mason in it and the full library, and you see the impact on the financial policies. Key issues is tab 1, and those are full written out. I'll highlight a few of them tonight, but you have a lot of reading material before your next work session. We will do highlights of the projects that are in here to set the stage for the 2 work sessions, and of course end for comments, questions, and additional information that you'd want for follow-up. The CIP is in the similar binder notebook as I've done in the past, so that if we do revisions or additional information, you can easily incorporate them. They'll be tabbed and numbered. And you have in here the full financial policies and information in tab 2. So where we were talking about just a few minutes ago about the development services doing their budget, besides the budget guidance for the CIP, you will also have it for the operating budget. So you'll see in the budget guidance a lot of emphasis on fund balance restoration, and I'll speak to that in a minute, CIP for infrastructure, but also to put Mr. Snyder's comments in perspective for a slight diversion all of our operating budgets, minus personnel, existing personnel, have to come in at a 0% growth in order to do the budget projections. The goal is that if everybody comes into zero, we'll have a little bit of play to prioritize which things in the organization need to be funded. And I can guarantee you, everybody will be submitting at our deadline a lot of priority needs, justifying their cases, and we will not be able to fund them all. So it's going to be quite challenging. So I just give you that perspective. Right now, the direction from the city manager is no new staff in the operating budget submissions. We have a place where we can put the other impacts and needs. So Mr. Snyder will be able to make his case. You'll have the facts on which to make your decisions. The funding sources are again color-coded, and you have the gold for grants, italicized for debt, pay-as-you-go is in blue, and then green is only if other funded, and that'll make sense as I work through the projects again. This is to demonstrate multi-year funding of projects. A new option in the CIP this year you'll see in the tab 3 summary sheet, if you want to flip to 3-1 or 3-2 as a sample, pages 3-1, 3-2, is there's an FY12 column. FY12 has your adopted CIP, the amended CIP in November, which you all had as a separate action. And then there are some items that in this CIP we're recommending to amend the FY12 budget. So when the council adopts the budget on April 23rd, if Planning Commission recommends and they concur, we would actually be able to amend this year's budget and move those projects forward instead of waiting till July. Some of those are mostly tied to grants and match funding so that we can keep those projects moving forward. And so what that would be is you'd be amending FY12 and we'd be adopting FY13 CIP simultaneously, allowing staff to move several months earlier. So that's why you have an extra column in my spreadsheet. Instead of making it even super tiny with that, you'll see it's now on 2 pages instead of 1. The font's still tiny, but it's not as tiny as it would have been. The projects, again, are organized by function, so you get environment or facilities versus schools, general government, and Rex and Park, for example. The facilities, again, are integrated all under public facilities. And on the summary sheet, you will see a project, even if it's not being recommended, so that you can see the things that are identified as staff needs but couldn't be recommended. Examples of that would include, I'm going to shift over for a minute, on page 3-1, the George Mason High School items that Ms. Carney mentioned are in the CIP full document and listed here as not recommended. The same is true for utility relocation under transportation. We also have a couple items that are not CIP eligible. So if you were to look under recreation and parks, you will see resurfacing of the track at George Mason High School and redoing the synthetic turf at George Mason High School football field. Those are both deemed maintenance under new accounting codes and cannot be included in the CIP. They were, however, formally submitted by the Rex and Park Advisory Board and the school board, so I've incorporated them so you can see what the full needs are, but they are not recommended to be in the CIP. So you'll see in that first column on the summary sheet some annotated notes to just give you a context for the status of that project. Later on in the tab relevant to facilities, for example, the full school board's recommendation is there and it puts it in context. We'll write up later a summary here. Circling back to the schedule for just a moment, we do have our first public hearing and presentation this evening. January 30th, as Chair Teets indicated, is a 5th Monday work session. I believe right now the only thing you'll be delving into is CIP, so we'll have plenty of time to talk. Right now the focus for that session is school facilities, parks, and fields, and I've incorporated that because of the baseball, softball project that's in the CIP is really a joint school Rex benefit, and so since the superintendent and school board would be here for school facilities, we'll do the parks and fields, utilities, public safety, and IT. Then on the 6th, we'll pick up with environment, which will be timely because council's actually downstairs right now getting a full presentation from Mr. Hicks on the watershed management plan, and has a lot of detailed material that'll be part of that work session. We'll talk a lot about the transportation and then wrap up with general government facilities. So we'll start and end with facilities. Part of separating the facilities is to balance workload at the work sessions, but also to allow the facilities task force that Chair Teets mentioned earlier to have one more meeting to try to bring some recommendations to the Planning Commission. And currently you're scheduled to adopt the CIP, your recommendations for council on February 13th.
Actually, I believe that should be the 21st.
Okay.
Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Right, because of a holiday, right? Okay.
Yeah, I'll adjust the PowerPoint and the schedule. That will be fine.
Does that make it tighter for you?
The city manager just has to be done by March 13th, so I'm trying to get it to him as soon as possible, but
Okay.
that'll allow us an extra work session if you all need. As an overview for the summary sheet that's in there, I've just included the FY13, the first year that'll be appropriated in the budget, and then what the 5-year total is, not the sub-projects as I have historically done. So you'll have IT items before you, public safety, which is the fire station, public facilities, which includes schools, general government, libraries, environment, which is predominantly stormwater, transportation, which is a lot of projects because we've reprogrammed a lot of the money you've been seeing before, but we're actually teeing up to spend it and get every grant 100% matched. And in order to make it match the VDOT funding cycle, they're now broken back out into projects. So where before they were lumped last year's umbrella, now they're broken back out. Rex and Park will be the park master planning, along with the field issues as referenced earlier up at George Mason, Mary Ellen Henderson, but the baseball, softball field. So you can see the FY13 is a $15.6 million CIP, and the proposed before you this evening for the full 5 years is $48 million. The FY12 amendment that I was referencing earlier would be $1.5 million if you recommend those projects. For the utilities, which we will talk about on the February 6th January 30th work session, we'll go in more detail, but the water for 13 is just under $5 million, and sewer is much smaller at $750,000. All total for 5 years, $45 million for water and sewer. These are self-sustaining enterprise funds, and the projects are based on the newly completed water sewer rate study and the adopted rates. General fund summary, the sources of funding, as I mentioned earlier, color-coded. So you can see on the top line, those that are grant funded, in total $6.6 million. Debt finance is the bulk of the project given our fund balance and ability to do projects in the operating budget. We can handle the debt service. We're limited in pay-as-you-go. It's still $27 million. And then for only if grant, nothing in FY13, it's in the out years. That is predominantly the possibility of an enterprise fund for stormwater utility and commercial transportation tax overlay. I have not recommended that tax be considered or adopted for FY13 to give us another year to work with the chamber, because the real community issue, I think, will be stormwater. So instead of having both dialogues happen, we do the one, allowing us more time to work on projects with the business community. Pay-as-you-go is in blue, and it totals just under $3 million. So this is actually better than we've seen in a while. If you remember, the proposed FY13 CIP had $95,000 pay-as-you-go in it last year when you made your recommendation, and this year the full pay-as-you-go CIP is $200,000. This is based on some of the policies that council has implemented and a slow recovery of the economy. The CIP that's before you is consistent as required by charter and code to be consistent with the comp plan. It's also consistent with council vision, the transportation amendment, and then also the financial policies and the budget guidance that council has just adopted and are included in full in your CIP notebook, and I'll highlight a little bit more further on the presentation. This is just a highlight again of council's vision and the targeted desired states. So we build the CIP as well as the operating budget around outstanding government, world-class schools, sound finances, environmental harmony, successful development, etc. So each of your project descriptions includes a reference to where it's applicable to the comp plan and how it is compliant, because the vision ties into the comp plan and then down to our strategies and implementation. Some of the challenges as well as the opportunities that we face. We clearly, as we've talked last year, have long-range infrastructure planning that is important and needs to be continue to be addressed, whether it's Ms. Carney's references to facility planning or the watershed management discussion going on downstairs on stormwater. It's still a challenging economic time. We are seeing signs of recovery, but local governments do lag behind. And our chief financial officer regularly reminds us that revenue is growing slower than expenditure growth is. Actually, this evening, the latest financial report is being presented to council also, and that'll be available on the web if you wish to get an update before we talk in more detail. We, of course, have to prioritize because we can't fund everything. We're going to have to over time, and I think we're really getting there, although it's been a long time if we talk about the schools and the general government, but we are getting to a multi-year master plan that can't all be done in 5 years, but also can't be, as just recently referenced, kicked down the road. There are a lot of grants, as Mr. Snyder mentioned earlier, in terms of transportation and also stormwater for managing, and they will be multi-year work plans, but we also finally have them fully matched. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the policies and what's changed in the policies and how it impacted the CIP. For the debt policies, council did not change those, so you all are familiar with outstanding debt cannot exceed 5% of our taxable real estate. We would have such a humongous debt service that we wouldn't be able to afford it in the operating budget, the debt service, if we ever got that big. So that's never an issue. The annual debt service shall not exceed 12% is, of course, one that we have to monitor. The proposed CIP is clearly within that plan. The all-in is not, and we'll highlight that in a little bit. So if you see for the current CIP for FY13, it's 6.7%. Clearly, we are not at the 12%. The same is at 17. If you shift to page 3-3 in your notebook, you can see towards the bottom the whole debt service ratio through the ways out. If we adopt the CIP as currently proposed to you this evening, the debt service between FY12 to FY17 grows almost $1.5 million. At our current $300,000 per penny, that would equate to about 4.5 cents on the tax rate, all things being equal. If assessed value doesn't go up, there's not new economic development that would change our tax base. 4.5 cents of the tax rate would have to be either funding the CIP or an increase to fund it so we don't offset elsewhere. How does that translate visually? We always give you the graph. So the top pink line is the policy. This is where we are now. This is the first time since I've been presenting a CIP to you all that there's actually a gap between what we're proposing and what our limit is. This is a very good thing because it means we do have some growth. But what has to be translated is can we afford that? Because the debt service has to be funded in the operating budget. And that's where we would have a problem in the all-in plan if we were to bring $87 million additional in the CIP. So for example, let me turn you to, in your notebook, still in tab 3, to the pretty divider that's turquoise. That's to flag for you that that what's behind there is the all-in plan. What's before it is my recommendation. This is the all-in plan. On page 3-5, you will see in red the 6.7 library expansion, and then down a little farther, the 80 million for the George Mason. What is in the proposed CIP, as I've recommended it this evening, is the Cherry Street 2 million and the Mount Daniel 6 million. As I'll comment later, but the library is not recommended in the CIP, but rather the city manager is proposing to put in the operating budget a study to really relook at the space needs, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So if you would then, behind the teal all-in scenario, look at 3-17, that page, you will see on the far right a green column where I put in FY18. The CIP goes 13 through 17, but when we do the budgeting, we approve a project in, let's say, Mount Daniel in FY16, the debt service 15, the debt service kicks up in 16. So if we bring in 40 million in FY17 for George Mason, the debt service impacts 18. So in order to see the full picture in the all-in scenario, you will see that the debt service would hit the 17% in FY18, and in FY17, 12.5%. So debt-wise, we cannot do both of those projects within this 5-year period.
Ms. Bester, just one quick question on this. So the recommended right now has no money in the out years for the high school at all.
That is correct.
Have you, perhaps for the school board, run some scenarios of different amounts of money so that they can see how it affects the CIP, because maybe there's a more middle ground?
Just this last Thursday, Mr. Shields and myself met with Dr. Jones and Mr. Kimball, and we were reviewing for the first time the school board's adopted CIP. So you'll see on my summary sheet it's not fully reviewed because we haven't had that opportunity. We had a preliminary discussion on what could we do with Mount Daniel to split up the money to maybe do 2 fiscal years, but the school board hasn't had an opportunity to revisit, and I believe they will be this week at a special, at one of their upcoming meetings. The reality is that I agree that we need to address the facilities, and getting in the CIP starts to do the discussion. But as you've heard me say many times, we cannot do every single facility in a 5-year period. That's why I've been advocating for a multi-year master plan that's 10 to 15 years. So policy-wise, we can't do it. We cannot absorb that much tax rate increase to fund that debt service also within that 5-year period to get to, that would take your debt service to 8.4 instead of 5.3, you know, so we'd be in the 20 to 25 cent range tax rate increase. That's not going to happen. And then I think one of the things that I look forward to working with the superintendent on and the school board on is the reality of doing all those projects, because 4 major construction projects, TJ's just kicking off, phase 2 is in the CIP, you'd have Cherry Street, you'd have Mount Daniel. 2 of these projects are in Fairfax County, and as the superintendent knows, it's going to be a little challenging to do the rezoning and the permitting process, and their consultants are estimating at least a year. So I think, in reality, we're going to have to tweak this timeline a bit. We haven't had that conversation yet. So that's why I've given you the 2 scenarios, so that you have the foundation. We're having the conversation in the work sessions, and we delve into that. What are the impacts on the financial policies, the tax rate, and the affordability, and then what are the infrastructure needs, so you can make some policy decisions in your recommendation. But once again, This is, as is proposed, not the all-in policy limits. If it was all in, we'd violate the policy at FY16. For the unassigned reserve fund balance, this is a lot of text because it's a brand new policy, so I've summarized it here, but once again, you have the full text in your notebooks. The unassigned is a new accounting term. You used to hear us refer to it as undesignated, so now we have to call it unassigned, and you'll occasionally hear me revert back, I'm sure. But the Council has also, at the recommendation of our new Chief Financial Officer, changed the basis of which we build our fund balance. It's now a percentage of expenditures, not expenditure of revenues. So before, we were to not go below 12% of revenues. Now it's 17% of expenditures. So the percentage is larger, but that's because it's a different base. It equates to about 2 months of savings. So 2 months of our expenditures would be in the bank to cover the emergencies or the unexpected. All of the policies I'm talking about this evening are predominantly towards the general fund because that's what has the biggest impacts on the tax rate and where we tend to put most of our conversation. But the utility funds also now have applicable similar financial policies. So the target is 17%. If we go below 12%, we have to have mitigation. And if we go below 17%, we have to have mitigation. So we always want to be 17% or above. We absolutely cannot be below 12%. If we're under 12%, 2 years we have to regain that floor. So that means you have to increase your funding to the fund balance. If less than 17% above the 12, we need to do a 3-year fiscal year plan, equal installments, get back to the 17. All total, 5 years to get to recovery. The 2-year and the 3-year and the 5-year are the same framework that you all are familiar with. So in order to implement that and to have sustainability and not have to be in a position where we cut $4.6 million out of the CIP a couple years ago, this budget is built on, and so will the operating, on fund balance restoration. There is a new capital reserve fund balance established by policy that is 5% of our fixed assets on the general fund and then a similar calculation on the water fund, or $3.75 million is the floor of that capital reserve fund, the minimal amount that needs to be in there by 2021. So this is going to be a gradual get to that point. We're going to be starting, we actually start in FY12, the CIP is further built about building that in. So the goal is to keep putting $500,000, by policy, it's not a goal, $500,000 a year into the capital reserve fund till you get to the $375,000, and then drop down to $375 a year, which would then allow more pay-as-you-go. Once again, if we drop below the floor value of that capital reserve fund, we have to go back and restore it. The intent of having this capital reserve fund is then we can earn interest on that and use that to pay debt service, or if there was a really critical project that we really needed to do, by policy, council could use that money and then restore back. In the current FY12 budget, there was $1.3 million dedicated to fund balance restoration. That's been continued in the CIP for 13 through 17. So let me take you back to tab 3, but on the proposed version, page 3-3, so you can see how this plays out. At the top of the chart, this is page 3-3 again, you'll see the total revenues and then 3 lines under it. You'll see reserve for fund balance, capital reserve, and pay-as-you-go. So under council's budget guidance, they committed money to pay-as-you-go, capital reserve, and fund balance, but it was by proposed policy how we divvied that up. But as you know, by policy, $500,000 has to go to capital reserve, but it didn't have to start till FY14. So what you see in FY13, you see 1.1 going to fund balance restoration, because we have to get to that 17%, and then 200,000 to pay as you go. Now in that FY13 column, which happens to be right under the hole punch, because we just got a new copier and I didn't align the top header right. But in the hole punch middle row, if you drop down to fund balance, you'll see that 16.9%. That is very close to the 17%, and Mr. LaCondre believes that we will be there actually in 12 and 13 based on how revenues are going this year, because they're above projections, which you can see in the report he's giving downstairs. So by the end of this fiscal year, actually all of those will move up and be in compliance. So don't worry that it's not quite 17%. But what that also then allowed us to do, if you go back to the page before at 3-32 down to the funding sources, you can see in FY13 there's actually over 700,000 for pay-as-you-go, because we were able to do some additional money beyond the 200,000 that by policy had to come out of the 1.3 million. And then each year thereafter, there's a whole lot more pay-as-you-go, because we're able to start rebuilding back in. And then in the out years, going back to 3-3, you'll see 14 to 17 committed money every year to those three funding sources. Also, once we're over the 17, if there was to be good times again and we have a big surplus, those monies could be dedicated towards capital one-time as you go, or to debt service of projects. This is what the reserve balance policy now looks like. So the pink is the 17%, and you can see that at 14 and out, we're basically back to policy, the new policy. This is really good. We want to be there. We definitely don't want to be where we were before, because we had dropped below, because as you know, that's why we lost the $4.5 million, because we had to restore fund balance. You also don't want to be way up here, because that's where you would be using money for capital. So it's a balance of doing the fund balance and taking care of our infrastructure needs. So the proposed is right there. Once again, sort of as a summary of how the CIP was developed, is achieving that 17%. We really looked at a fresh start of the CIP and went back to the zero base and built up on needs. We do have the FY12 amendment option. This CIP has all known grants fully matched. We went back and really verified all of the state and federal grants, and they're matched. It is a balance of recharging fund balance, as I mentioned, and addressing infrastructure needs. I've noted the long-term, for long-term planning, those that aren't recommended. And I do believe, as I said last year, that trying to take care of some of our facility needs as well as infrastructure needs right now is a good time. We just did a refi and a bond issuance, and we got great financing with our bond rating renewals held firm, and construction is starting to go up, so we're still sort of at the slow tick up of construction costs. So now is a good time to do what we can and what we can afford.
Yeah, Matt, Cindy, that was mentioned in the last facilities task force meeting, to actually really look at the cost of money right now, to maybe readjust what we were thinking of doing and everything.
So the CIP is built on that. That's why you have a lot more facility projects in here. But once again, it couldn't be 100% of everything due to the reasons I previously mentioned. Here in the summary is the chart I've been referring to, so you can see that here we have to be at 17 or greater, and here we have to be at 12% or below. So clearly, for the first time, we have more debt service capacity by policy, but you got to translate affording the debt service in your operating budget, and we can't absorb. Right now this is built on, and Mr. LaCondre is comfortable with the 4.5 cent increase for the debt service, but not above that. So with that, I'm going to move into a quick summary of the projects that are in the CIP. Chair, do you want me to keep going, or do you want to pause for any other comments or questions on the financials?
We can pause. Does anyone have a question at this time? Doesn't look like it, so I can go ahead and keep forward. Thank you.
Perfect. For the last couple of years, we have not had IT projects in the CIP. This year, we do have a little over $1 million. 500,000 of the FY13, including my typo of an FT, just to make sure you all are paying attention, is for police dispatch. Their phone is so antiquated, our joke is we can donate it to the Smithsonian. We cannot get parts on it anymore. We're actually going on eBay to try to find cards to replace the dispatch. Not a good thing. It's not fully integrated with Arlington either. And then right now, the library fiber and phone connection between the library to City Hall is failing, and we're lost several of the phone lines, and we've had to jerry rigs. It turned out when we renovated the library, somebody didn't put them into conduits. So we need to get them in conduit. And we also want to connect City Hall and library with fiber so that we can do some consolidation of servers and blade and get a little more green and energy efficient, which would also give the library some space back. On the FY13, the general government schools IT is predominantly around phones. The PBX phone system that we use, the servers are end of life, the one at City Hall, and 3 of the schools are end of life. The schools have needs for phone enhancements, so because we could capitalize on it and put it into debt, I've put it here because it doesn't impact operating budgets. This would also include connectivity with our Merrifield off-site property yard, connect Aurora House, and the school, so we can be fully redundant and back each other up if one line goes down, which is, we've got it part way now. So if the City Hall phones go down, we can go through the George Mason circuit and vice versa, but it's not complete. This would allow us to complete that and have better continuity of operations. For public safety, the only public safety item before you is for the fire station. This is for the windows, as you've seen for several years running, but also adding the bay doors. I am constantly approving requisitions because the bay doors just crumble, come off their runners, scratch up. If you go by, you can just see them where they're hitting the overhead piece. It's $250,000. You'll notice that there's no ladder truck or pumper truck in the CIP. That is true of all vehicles. With a new accounting change, vehicles are not in the CIP anymore. They have to be capital in the operating. So cruisers, fire trucks, dump trucks, any of the stuff with CMAQ you would have seen before is now in the operating budget. That's also what happened, sort of with the turf and the track and field too. So what we're continuing to do is in contract negotiations that started last year with the county on how to best fund this. The fire station and personnel have identified we need more stations, more personnel there, more trucks. A lot of it is for Arlington calls, so that piece is being negotiated. So right now what's before you is $250,000. For general government facilities, we'll have a lot of discussions on this at the February 26th work session, but there is money in there to continue the critical health and safety work, the expansion out back, the proposed out back expansion, the out front central entrance, and parking. This is the work that council had many works on after Planning Commission adopted last year, and it got broken out into several subsections. I'm proposing to consolidate it back in, and that's what you see before. I'm bringing the rear entrance back because as we've worked with the task force, it clearly became very hard to sequence it and do it right and be cost effective and not put money in to undo money. We'll go through that in detail. It is still a very smaller scale than what you've seen in the early Dewberry studies. It's been right-sized, but there is a new parking concept that we'll walk through in more detail that's a little bit more structured out front than back. In your CIP notebook, in tab 6, you have the full final report 3 of the Dewberry study that the task force has seen draft. It's gone final now, just got it today. So I've included in your CIP so you can have it for advanced review before the work session. As I noted earlier, the library expansion is not recommended in this CIP. The library board did put in the full request of the $6.75 million that we first saw in 2009. The last couple years they had it in for $2 million for land acquisition or a building nearby. City manager, as I noted, has recommended to the library director, and I believe has met with the library chair, or at least briefed, that we're recommending a space study update. The Dewberry study did a cursory review, but things have changed a lot since 2008 in terms of more meeting room study carousel areas needed, less hard copy materials because of e-books, looking at MP3s. Things are changing, and if we move the server out. So before we commit to facilities, reassess that. For facilities at school, you've gotten a bit of a highlight this evening from school board member Susan Carney. As we said, January 30th, we'll have a full work session on this so you can hear directly from the school board and the superintendent. Phase 2 of TJ is included in the CIP. The funding for Cherry Street and Mount Daniel is discussed, and once again, the George Mason High School is. However, in tab 6, the last section of your tab 6, you have the full school board adopted CIP included, so you can see the full dollar amounts, and then for each of those projects, their appendix for a brief description of that project. For the environment, we have stuff in there for water and sewer utility improvements, stream bank stabilization, which is the federal STAG grant, and stormwater, which for FY13 has debt funded coming out of the general fund, and then for the out years, you'll see it green in your CIP because of the discussion around whether or not that'd be an enterprise fund.
Sorry, on your previous slide, we talked about the $94 million for the schools included in ACM proposal.
Sorry, Assistant City Manager.
Okay.
I was trying not to get the font too small.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so by me. So in it, you have the full thing, even though I didn't recommend it all. Stormwater facility, we'll have a real good discussion on that because the watershed management plan is coming to a close for that task force work, and council's being updated this evening, as I mentioned. The solid waste investment or the expansion of the recycling center, which was for $100,000, is not recommended in this CIP. That would be moving fence and doing new paving, and then prioritizing stuff. That would really need to be pay-as-you-go because it wouldn't have a lifespan of 10 years to do debt financing, and we didn't have pay-as-you-go room to move. This is just a history of what we've been doing. Nothing new here than what you've seen before in terms of the Army Corps of Engineers study and level of service. Of course, it has been a hot topic of recently with our tornadoes and tropical storms and the flooding of people's basements, roads, and yards. Water and sewer, there's quite a bit of projects in there. It continues to implement the updated master plan, is looking at replacement and repair of existing mains and for water and sewer, but then also improvements to similar projects you've seen in terms of the McLean Pump Station, Tyson's Tank, and the Kirby Road. All of the projects in the CIP for the utility funds are debt financed. Transportation will be a full discussion on February 6th also. It is reprogramming and reappropriating a lot of the federal money. That's the VDOT 6-year money, the Federal Transit Authority, and the revenue sharing. So we'll go over that in more detail. And as I mentioned, it ensures that we have 100% funded, and it's much more granular in terms of the projects, which I think is going to be much more helpful to the community for transparency and what are the projects when they see it out on the street, instead of that umbrella $4 million, and you wouldn't know if we're doing Gresham Place or a ped crossing there. So you'll see that very detailed. Tab 8's the biggest one. And as I mentioned, commercial transportation tax overlay, I'm not proposing in FY13, but in the CIP, there are a list of proposed projects that staff would recommend being considered, which is one of the things the Chamber asked for, is we need a starting point. What projects are you talking about? Let's talk about the transportation projects in a plan before we start talking about developing a taxing district. And so you'll see a lot of projects there listed below that we'll go through in much more detail. For recreation and parks, I just highlight that the first line that the open space fund does still have a little over $1 million. It, of course, needs a project and a focus for acquisition. There is park master plan funding continued. This one changed significantly from when you all saw it to council adopted last year, because it all went into master planning and there was nothing broken out for West End or the Howard E. Herman Valley Stream Park. So that the new Rexham Park director and the Rexham Park Advisory Board could sort of reassess and have some flexibility. They have done that, and they have continued to still put money in park master planning, but have separated back out West End and Howard E. Herman Valley Stream Park, so it's clear to the community where the money would go to in a targeted focus and timeline. One of the challenges we're having with the park master plan, as well as the turf and the field track lighting, is the accounting that doesn't allow maintenance to be in CIP, that accounting code. And then also, if you don't have a lot of pay-as-you-go, you don't want to debt finance stuff that doesn't have a good 10-year or more lifespan. So the Rexham Park director is having to look really closely. There is the $200,000 for several years in here for master planning, but it can't just resurface a tennis court. It has to fix the whole trail in Cavalier Park, or really put in the park master plan at Howard E. Herman, for example. So he's working on the nuances. Clearly, there's plenty of need for $200,000 a year. But he's going to be refining that with the Rexham Park. What that means is there'll be unmet need in the operating budget for the maintenance that's been cut quite a bit in Rexham Park. The baseball, softball, field lighting is in the CIP. That's in the school board's adopted, but it really is joint with Rexham Parks because we do a lot of shared field use and we have the MOU. That will be discussed at the same night that we do the school facilities, since the superintendent will be present. And then that ends my presentation. Since it's going up on the website, I included how to find me. You all know how to find me and where to find this document, because we will post it to the website on the budget page. And now I'm available for other questions or comments or additional information you'd like at future meetings.
So do any of the commissioners have questions for Ms. Messer before we open up for public comment? No? Okay, Ms. Hockenberry, then Ms. Rogers.
Well, Ruth, you go first. Okay. Okay. You've got the key policy transportations listed all here, but where's the multimodal and the Washington Street?
That, because it's already adopted and it was in the FY11.
Okay.
It's not showing up here.
Okay.
But it's actually been awarded for design and it's moving along quite nicely. And I know Wendy will be able to give you an update at the work session for where that project is, if
Good,
you'd
because
like.
we haven't had any feedback on those.
We can have an update when we do the other transportation projects.
Rogers?
Yes. I have a question about the turf and field track resurfacing. I know it's not CIP eligible, but I'm finding it on page 6.5, and I'm not seeing it in the Parks and Rec budget, but I am seeing it in the school budget.
Yeah,
Or
both,
in the
both the,
I'm not quite certain how you're breaking this out, and also if it's going to be totally funded under the school projects, and if that's the case, how is it going to break down for use of Parks and Rec?
the Rexton Park Advisory Board's recommendation is on 9-7 under tab 9. The school boards, because the majority of their CIPs were facilities, you'll find it in the facilities section because they did a joint one document, and I didn't have the superintendent split it out, and I didn't duplicate it twice. So the turf and the lighting are on the one under tab 6 for the schools. Since it's going to be in the operating budget and not the CIP, that will have to be a discussion to be talked about. One of the things that we really need to do is establish a maintenance reserve account, just like we now have a capital reserve account. As a matter of policy, in our operating budgets, both on the general government side and schools, the schools have it for their buses, I know for sure, but we need to start planning for some of these fields for things that happen out 5 years that we know we're going to need to start building the funds for. The turf was good for 10 years. That's going to come up in FY17, and so that's why both the school board and the Rexton Park Advisory Board put it out on the table to be funded. Researching it a little more detail, since we only have to replace the top part and none of the infrastructure below, it's a maintenance item. There is an MOU that speaks to the utilization of the field, and when the football players use it versus Rexton Park, and I'm sure both Danny and Tony could speak to that, you know, whether we'd look at a 50-50 split for funding of that. We haven't gotten to that level of detail.
But people realize that there's going to be a break. I mean, that there is going to be a split in time.
That's certainly the general assumption, but have we talked about, there's currently a split in time now.
No, I
because as soon as we got all that, the field and the lighting, you could use it a boatload more. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of soccer stuff that's Rexton Park and football, and, you know, you got the end zones behind the goalposts you can use now for the little guys because it's long enough for a field for practice. But we can talk about that. But we have not gotten to the level of detail of how it would be funded, and it's not, since it's an out year, it's not going to be in the FY13 operating budget, clearly, and so we'll have to work towards.
Okay, thank you.
Well, let me open this item for public comment. Ms. G, did we receive any correspondence on this or any speaker slips?
Madam Chair, I have none.
Okay, would anyone in the audience like to speak to the CIP? No? No? Do we have any other questions from the commissioners? Yes, Mr. Lofgren.
In regards to the stream bank restoration, I see FY07 through FY11, $582,000 in unexpended balance. Was that due to a lack of funds that we had for the 45% matching requirement?
Yeah, we needed to get the match so that we could fully use the federal money. It's Engineering Public Works has designed it, and they're pretty much ready to go, which is why you see it in the FY12 amendment, because if it gets approved in April, then they could proceed. Okay. But we needed to fully match it.
Right. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I guess we'll look forward to several lovely work sessions where we'll get more details on everything. I feel like I have a lot of questions, but I think I need to read it first because I have a feeling most of the answers are in here.
Well, I look forward to the work sessions. If you want to send me questions in advance so that I and the staff can be more prepared, that's great. But if not, you'll notice in the schedule, I sort of have it planned that at the next work session, we'd answer the questions from before so that we can try to wrap it up. And with the shift to February 21st, that would give time for follow-up if needed from the February 6th work session.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Mester.
Thank you, Commission.
Okay. Looking at our agenda, it looks like we have no other business this
Madam
evening.
Chair,
Oh,
if I
yes.
may. Usually the Planning Commission will continue the public hearing on the CIP to its next meeting.
Oh, sorry. Can we get a motion to continue the public hearing to the next meeting, I guess, are we continuing it to February 21st or to the 6th, February 6th then?
Chair?
Yes.
I move that we continue presentation of fiscal year 13-7 capital improvements program until February 6th.
Okay, can I get a second? Can we just do that on a voice vote? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we will continue this public meeting until February 6th. Thank you, Ms. G. Okay, so now we're on to approval of minutes. Did anyone have any comments or changes for the minutes?
Move to accept the minutes as presented?
Can I guess? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We have one abstention from Ms. Rogers, and the minutes are approved. And now we have one more motion, please.
Motion to adjourn.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Okay, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.